And joining me on the line now to have a look at In the Garden this week is Kim Odering. Good evening, Kim.
G'day, Nick. How are you going?
I'm good. It's been rather cold, hasn't it, this past few days?
Well, it's a little bit odd, isn't it? It's sort of up and down, up and down.
So what veggies can we sow now, even in the cold weather?
Right. Well, the thing is that in the North Island, remember we've talked about the North Island
Yeah.
being different to the South Island. So there's the South Island is behind the North Island by a month, 4 weeks to 6 weeks. Now, there's two ways to do your vegetables. That is, if you sow them yourself into seed raising trays, in which case you need an inch depth of seed raising tray, fill it with seed raising mix, which any garden centre sells. Make sure it is a seed raising mix. And then you would get labels and an ink pen, and you would, because you don't need so many for the home garden, you see. In a nursery or a nursery situation, they would just fill up the whole tray with tomatoes. You see what I mean? They'd just sow the whole tray full of
Yeah,
tomatoes.
but that would give you too much crop, wouldn't it? So
Yeah, well,
yeah,
of course, for the home gardener, that would give you
yeah.
too much crop. But look, for the North Island, they can start sowing in seed raising trays, not plant straight out in their garden yet, but they can start sowing because the seeds will germinate from 10 to 14 days, but it'll be 6 weeks before they plant out into the garden. And even then, we have to be a little bit careful of the softer crops, such as the deadly nightshade crops, tomatoes, eggplants, capsicums. We have to be a little bit careful of them because the night temperatures have to be a little higher. Okay, so depending on what your weather's doing in any area in the North Island, you could start sowing them into seed trays now.
Can I just
Okay?
ask you something, Kim? Why on earth would anybody be
Yeah.
planting deadly nightshade?
Well, that's what we're eating, love. We're eating the deadly nightshade plants when we're eating tomatoes,
Oh, I see.
capsicums.
Right.
Yeah.
Are they
Now,
part of the
now they
same
do.
same family? Are they?
Yes, they are part of
Yeah.
the same family.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Potatoes are as well. And of course, they've got lots of lectins in them, which are beneficial to us, but in great amounts aren't beneficial to us. So the way to even that up is eat heaps of berries because they contain a protein that actually works against the less. But anyway, back to the subject.
Yeah.
You can start sowing them now in the North Island, but I wouldn't bother sowing them into seed trays yet in the South Island or the colder parts of the South Island for another 4 weeks. Okay. Now, what you can plant directly into the ground now in the North Island would be carrots, peas, parsnips, beans, beetroot, radish, swedes. And in the South Island, I wouldn't be planting the beans and the peas straight into the ground now. I would do the carrots, the beetroot, the parsnips, the onions and spring onions, and also the North Island should get their spring onions and onions straight into the ground.
So this is seeds that we can put in the ground now, not seedlings, but actual seeds. Is that correct?
Yes, seeds in the
Okay.
ground. Yes, that's right. Now you've got to get you've got to get your garden ready for this. And now whether you've got raised beds or ground level beds, this is what I like to do. I like to put on a heap of compost. Now, I would put that on the top of the gun because as I've pulled the plants out from the previous season, I've lost a bit of soil, you see, from their roots and what have you, and I've put them in the compost bin or thrown them out or whatever. But so the ground is a bit lower. So I like to put about 3 to 4 inches even of compost on. Now that would be my favourite actual manure or compost or manure, but I try to search out that lovely pig manure that's well rotted by up to a year. I love that stuff. It's great. And then I would put in, so I would mix in a bucket 2 cupfuls of potash to a bucket full of blood and bone, and I would lay that across the top. I would put a handful per square metre of lime on the top of that, and then I would dig it furiously. Of course, it doesn't do my back any good as we're getting older, but never mind. Dig that in furiously, make the bed lovely and friable. Friable means all the clods broken up and the good and the nutrients that you've just put on the top all dug in together. A bit like mixing a cake, really.
What does the lime do, Kim?
The lime raises the pH of the soil.
Ah, right.
The lime raises the pH of the soil. So, and then I actually put on trace elements as well. So the trace elements, what we're lacking in New Zealand, we're lacking a lot of trace elements in New Zealand in our soil. So I put on about half a handful per square metre of that. Dig it all in, make it really lovely and friable. Now, the reason that you make it all sort of broken up and so that the soil falls through your fingers is because now you're going to make rows with your hand. I just use the side of my hand, and I bring I drag my hand down in rows to about a depth of about 5 to 10 millimetres, and then I just lightly cover those up. Lightly cover those seed. Once I've sown the seed, I lightly cover those over with soil, and then of course don't use a heavy water spray on them. Just use a light spray on those to make sure that the soil is well moistened through.
Actually, Kim, I was going to ask you about that. Should you actually dampen down the area before you put the seeds in so they're not going into very dry soil?
Well, that would be great, except it's at this time of the year the soil is often drenched. So it's an absolute pig planting in soil that's totally wet. Yeah. So I don't usually wet down, even when I'm sowing seeds when the soil is drier. I don't have the soil so dry that it's parched. So like it's dust. You don't have it like that ever. So if your soil was, the electrodes were not letting water through, then you'd have to add something like a wetter soil or a penetrant that breaks down the electrodes of the soil that allows the water to soak through. You ever watered a pot and all the water runs down the side and you scrape underneath and it's still dry?
Yeah. Mm.
You never, that's when electrodes have built up around the soil particles, and of course it won't let the water through the soil. There is a product called Wetter Soil that is put out there on the market, and there's a couple of them, that actually breaks down the electrodes in the soil, and you just sprinkle it on top, and then when you water it, allows the water to go through. So same in your veggie garden. Your veggie garden should never have soil in it that's like dust, but I wouldn't necessarily go and wet my soil. It should be just moist, it shouldn't be very wet. And I wouldn't necessarily do it beforehand. I would water afterwards.
Do you garden with your bare hands, Kim?
I do.
Yeah, because we just had a picture up of somebody doing that, and I think most people do. But with the Legionnaire's disease from the potting compound and all that kind of stuff, do you have to be a bit careful around those kind of things?
I have been around soil my whole life, been around hundreds of people that have been around soil. And I think it's a bit like the cell phone and the not having cell phones on at the petrol station. Because one blew up once, everybody's running scared. But I'm not scared of Legionnaires. I think it's a minor health risk, to be fair. And but if you are concerned about it, by all means, wear a dust mask. Yep.
Yeah.
Wear a dust mask if you're at all concerned about it.
Do you think children? Do you think children don't get enough dirt these days?
I totally think children need to go through their flus, and they need to get filth on them, and they almost need to, eat a piece of dog poo or something. Just because it's when you're children. I firmly believe this, Nick, that when you're children, that's when you build up all your immunity.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And we used to be a hardier lot. I think perhaps, we could go political here and say, I think perhaps people are mollycoddling their kids too much and what have you. And it's not hard to do, is it?
Do you have any grandchildren yet? Do you have any grandchildren?
I do. I have 6. I have 6.
Oh,
My
right.
children, I'm only 54 and I have 6 grandchildren.
Oh,
I mean,
fantastic.
honestly, bunch of rabbits we are. Bunch of rabbits. They're lovely too. Love them to bits. You know what grandchildren are, Nick? They're God's gift for not killing
Absolutely.
your own children. They so are. They just so are.
Right, then
So I've
we've
had
got a couple
grandchildren,
of
yes, helping me in the garden.
now something that grandchildren love, of course, is rhubarb. So tell us about
Oh,
dividing up rhubarb
yes.
and other herbaceous perennials.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap. We'll go backwards and we'll start with the rhubarb. So if you've already got a rhubarb plant, now would be the time to dig it up and split it. Now you do that. Most plants you see have a natural division. They just have an area or a gap where you can put a spade through it. So if you wanted more than one plant, you could certainly split your old rhubarb plants now. Now is a really good time to do it.
So just chop them in two
And
and stick them
if
back in the
you
ground.
haven't got any, yeah, chop them in two and stick them back in the ground. And of course, whenever you chop something in two and you stick it back in the ground, make sure it's well watered because plants do go into shock. They do get shocked. It's a bit like having your leg cut off, I suppose. We need maybe a bit of adrenaline to keep us going, but the water will actually help stop the shock. And of course, will be starting to sprout now, but they're relatively dormant. And if you haven't got any rhubarb, you can plant them now. So you can wander off down to your garden centre and get a rhubarb plant. Don't forget, everybody, get your strawberries in now. That's important. And remember, 30 to 40 centimetres apart. Prepare the ground like you would for a veggie garden, like I've just told you. And then when you finish planting them, add pea straw around the base of them and in between them, and that will protect the fruits later on, also help keep the moisture in the soil. Plant asparagus now, and don't be greedy with picking it for the first season. Pick 2 or 3 spears off each crown, because you'll plant the crowns, 30 to 40 centimetres apart, better in a raised bed, and then let the rest of the spears go to fern. That if you just leave the spears, they'll go into fern. And then when those ferns rot down, they will feed the crown again and you'll have a better crop the following year. Seed potatoes, you need them in by September to get a crop for Christmas, to get them on your Christmas table. So if you go down to your garden centre now, you get seed potatoes, you put them in a tray even to help sprout them in a sunny position, then you'll get them in the ground by September. Just make sure they're in the ground for September for Christmas eating. Remember that if you're sowing seeds, South Island, leave it for now. Leave the tomatoes, cucumbers, capsicum, eggplants. Sow them about the end of August. And even then, that's a little bit early for me. They take 6 weeks. So we're looking at end of August. We'd be looking at mid-October. But even so, in Canterbury, our night temperatures are still a little cold for that. Garden centres always have them out early. But you never put them in. Really, I don't even believe in putting tomato plants in before November myself. Because here in Canterbury, because I just never get a good crop out of them. I'd have to have a conservatory or a much warmer place to be able to get them in earlier. Yeah.
That's great. That's great stuff, Kim. Hey, we're out of time now, but I'm very much looking forward to talking to you again next week. And
I'm off to Australia.
are you?
I'm in
Okay.
Australia?
Should we give you a week off? Or should we talk to you by messenger
Yes.
in Australia?
I'll talk to you later. We might just have a wee something to say about how wonderful it would be to live in Australia with all their tropical plants.
Mind you, they're only 3 hours behind, so we might be able to do that, eh? Anyway, look, I'll be in touch with you during the week, and you enjoy a great trip to Australia, and hopefully we'll speak to you again next week as well.
Yes, all right then. Thank you so much, and happy gardening, everybody.